I think we. Oh, you've got an echo. That work? No. There's an echo. There's an echo. And not on here. I can hear it through the computer. Oh, there we go. I was like, oh, she. Thank you. Okay. All right. Make sure we're all good. Okay. It's now 5:30. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our pre-commission agenda. The only thing I have to share at this point is that I'm going to make the request that we move item number 4 on the consent agenda to item number 1 on the regular agenda. So I'd appreciate your support in moving that off of the consent agenda. And I think with that, any other housekeeping items or questions about the agenda? Okay, Director Wong.
Madam President, Commissioners, good evening. So just a couple short things to share with you. But starting off, most important, tomorrow is going to be a very important day. And that is that the world's greatest executive officer will be celebrating her birthday and such. So we do have a very special cakes, plural, that at the break, if you would like to, if you please join us in celebration, be greatly appreciated. We received news just recently that, as you know, we're looking for another joint meeting with Boise coming up. The Boise staff sent us a date of 17 June. And such. So anyway, that's over for your considerations and discussions, and we'll go from there. Commissioners, I found a couple things that I want to give to the head of communications here. It says, but I just thought that I'd share these with you. First off, it's this 1993 Vision of Change Guide from the Ada County Highway District, and it's kind of interesting. On our mission, it says in 1993, planning for and developing new transportation facilities and such. So it's been a long time coming, but this is what was produced in 1993. I found 2 things here that you might be interested in. In 2013, this is Ada County Highway District's future facilities plan, build, lease, or move. And such. There's some interesting reading in here, as is the staff report that went before that commission at that time. The Capitol Boulevard Plan and Action Program is very interesting. It has some very interesting insights and pictures for ribbon cutting ceremonies. That's a great history for the district. As you all know, this last legislative session, or last year's legislative session, provided this year's the Ada County Highway District full control and ownership of commuter ride. Just happened to find this signed copy of the legislation and such for you all. This envelope here is very interesting. ACHE Creations, first agreements going back to, and they're written and there's no typing here, 1974, 1975. Very interesting reading that I think would be very beneficial. And then this picture, intersection of Americana, Latah, and Emerald, Morris Hill Cemetery, circa 1950, and such. Very, very neat. And then this picture, the Idaho Statesman, ACHE dismissed 45, revenue falls short, and such. So great things, I think, to review and share with the rest of the team.
Madam President,
Commissioner Gilthorpe.
just one question. You're not cleaning out your office yet, are you?
There are only 2 things in office right now. 2 pictures. Before I walked up in here today, I was handed this summary of things I'd like to share with you, and such as we go forward. During my tenure, I have served 14 commissioners and such. I have had 3 executive officers. Of course, the best sitting over to your right over there. I've had 2 chiefs of staff. I've had 1 legal counsel, 1 human resource deputy director, 2 treasurers, 1, 2, 3, 4 development technical services deputy directors, 3 planning and projects deputy directors, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 deputy directors of maintenance. Of course, the best one sitting right over here. The numbers. 13 years ago, my budget was 82 million. It's now 229 million. Tremendous amount of responsibility for all of us as we move forward. Then we had 282 employees. Now we have 400 million. Staff, this is interesting. Staff members hired in the last 13 years, 643. Staff members terminated or retired, 482. It's an interesting series of numbers. The benefits that we owe all of the commissioners internal gratitude for back then and today going forward. Parental leave of 12 weeks, PTO sellback, Percy 401k matching at 2%, Percy 401k matching at 4%, tool increase allowance of $100 a month to non-crew chiefs, longevity incentive, recruiting incentive, referral incentive, retention incentive, additional 2 holiday days. Thank you, commissioners, Martin Luther King and Juneteenth. Increased PTO accrual rates, increased PTO sellback hours, increased maximum carryover, increased travel daily per diem, excess FTO and Percy reimbursements, those sort of things. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is just to, again, say thank you for all the support you give this amazing team. It is always greatly appreciated by the entire organization. There's 3 pages of capital projects by year that we have accomplished. I will not go through the 3 pages of the capital projects, but I want to say that this organization and with our commission leadership has been amazing in changing all for the better Ada County, and it's in facts as we move forward in operations. So with that, that is my director's report, and I would like to invite you, if President Pickering is willing, to go to a break and celebrate Stacy's birthday coming up.
But I would definitely embrace that with the caveat that thank you for your amazing leadership and this being your last director's report for the district. And in lieu of, because we're gonna have a big celebration tomorrow, but I just want to highlight your leadership, not only in working with and herding cats on the commission, but also leading your staff through some of the biggest changes I would argue any local organization in the state has ever seen in the last few years. And sticking through and providing your wisdom through all of those various obstacles and opportunities. And before we go and have cake, I would just like to do a big round of applause for you.
You. Now. No.
Tomorrow, Paul.
Yeah. Stacy,
Yes.
it's your birthday. You have the honors.
Oh, thank you.
All right, it's now 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone that's in person and online. Please join us for standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first order of business is to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next order of business is to adopt the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda, of course, my laptop just froze. Perfect. Where's my script? Here it is. Thank you. Okay, items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless noted. I've made the request to move item number 4 on the consent agenda to number 1 on the regular agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Move and second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, so item number 1 is the reposted ratification of the purchase and sale agreement for our 5800 North Meeker Avenue, Boise Avenue property. Mr. Steve Price. Can
Thank you, Madam
explain?
President, Commissioners, Steve Price, General Counsel. If you recall back towards the end of April, we were scheduled to have a closing on the Meeker property on April 30. We were trying to get it closed by the 25th or 26th, but the seller had a $1 billion lien on the property, and it took a lot of effort to try and get the lien removed, and it was finally removed around 12 o'clock on May 1, on April 30. And the district went ahead with the closing. We were hoping to have the closing and the commission meeting coincide, but we were unable to do that. We posted that properly as part of our regular meeting, except for we had to amend the agenda, which was less than 48 hours under Idaho Code 74-204. And that's fine if you amend the agenda, but to do so, you have to state the reason for the amendment and state the good faith reason the agenda was not included in the original agenda posting. That is something that was overlooked with all the chaos that was caused by trying to get the closing done within that time frame. It was brought to our attention last week. And I've looked at Idaho Code and feel that the best path forward for the district is to repost it, which we've done today. It was the only violation was the amendment, and we've included the reposting and of the agenda item for the ratification of the agreement. The Idaho Code 74-2087 provides steps to cure the violation. And part of that is my explanation, which I just did. So the violation is cured by us recognizing that the commission's decision on May 1 is void, and we now needed a decision by the commission to deliberate and make a decision in a valid public meeting. And so that's the presentation today on that. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Price. Commissioners, any questions? So this is an action item, so we'll just need to make a motion.
Right,
Any other-
President?
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Someone else get it?
No, you go for it.
I would make a motion to ratify the purchase and sale agreement.
Second.
for the Meeker property.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Steve. All right, moving on to item number 2. The Taft Street Sycamore Drive 36th Street Concept Study Adoption. Welcome, Ms. Brooke Green. This is a request for adoption and public hearing. I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Welcome.
Good evening. Just for the quick record, my name is Brooke Green, Senior Transportation Planner within Projects and Planning. I'm before you this evening to present the Taft Sycamore to 36th Street concept for consideration. I prefer that we take this forward to an adoption, certainly after the public hearing. Look forward to the results of a lot of hard work that went into this. It is my objective to provide you a brief overview of the Taft Street concept, review the 4 public engagement efforts, highlight the iterative alternative development process the team went through for several years, and lastly, hear from the public about the project itself, and then move this forward, hopefully, to adoption. Moving along, when we began this, we identified 3 goals. It was goal 1, maintain the existing character and unique assets of Taft Street. Goal 2, improve the safety of the corridor for all modes of transportation. 3, provide a multimodal corridor that connects all users to their destination within and beyond the corridor. However, it was in 2022, after several outreach efforts, that our team met and we made a concerted effort to press pause, primarily because of the feedback we were receiving, not only from the public, but from our own stakeholder groups, the PAG and the BAC. We wanted to look to this road with a different lens, asked ourselves, can we achieve the perfect street without such a large footprint? We established a new objective, return the street back to the neighborhood. It was primarily about, can we design the street and be context sensitive in that design? Take into account some of the hopes and visions that the neighborhood had, while also respecting the unique assets that this neighborhood already had, whether it be mature tree canopy or open green space, or whether it be, a ditch that many people would go and visit and sit next to and visit with the ducks. We wanted to look to the street and say, can we achieve our goal, all 3 of those goals, while lessening the footprint? The study area is no further west than Sycamore Drive and no further east than 36th Street. Local attractors along the corridor include Taft Elementary School, and you'll see that designated right there. Just a note, Taft Elementary School is along State Street. However, many of the folks can access Taft Elementary School through those adjacent streets listed there. In addition to that, Willow Park Athletic Complex is nearby across State Street. Before I go any further, I just want to paint a little picture for you and highlight the uniqueness and why it was so important that we took a pause when we went to examine this road. Taft Street, like I said, is very unique. It's a quaint street that over time saw quite the transformation. If you see it as you drive or you walk through the corridor, I would like to start on the west side there at Sycamore Drive. The approximate width of the roadway at that location, which is the narrowest along the corridor, is about 22 feet. It has large tree canopies overshadowing a very beautiful old eclectic church. Further east down the road, this is where we start to see the transformation from being more rural to being more dense. And you see a lot of homes fronting Taft Street. This is also the location where you start to see sporadic, sidewalks. There's not a complete sidewalk network, but you start to see pieces of it. But in addition to that, you start to see the road widens. At this location, closer to Arthur Street, the road widens to approximately 36 feet. And we know the wider a road is, the faster the cars go. And so we are starting to see that as all of our data came back pertaining to access and complaints about speeds along this corridor. As I mentioned, Taft Street took several years to come to fruition, and this is partly to our alternative refinement process. We began in the winter of 2021. That was our initial public survey. In 2022 was a series of concept iterations that we went through. We went out to the public, showcased the first of those alternatives, went back, refined it, and then went back out to the public once more, went through those survey results, got the feedback. And it was actually at that time that we started to get a lot of feedback from our stakeholder groups, more importantly, the PAG and the BAC. They provided a letter, gave us some ideas. And as a team, we decided it was necessary to press pause. We decided to do some additional analysis. That was an intersection analysis, a tree canopy analysis, examining if we were to put that footprint of either of those alternatives, how many trees would we be impacting? We decided to look at the parking, determine how the utilization of the parking is along the corridor. And at which point we did our revisions of the concept design. That was back in the winter of 2023. Pardon me. It was also at that time we went out with our last public outreach and we put forward the alternative you're going to see tonight. All of those stars represent engagement with the public, including the hearing for this evening. So we have taken a concerted effort with this team to press pause, really get the feedback from the public, from all of our stakeholder groups, re-examine the options available, look to all the data, and that's what brings us to the adoption hearing this evening. With that being said, I want to introduce to you the recommended alternative that the staff is putting forward. It includes 10-foot travel lanes throughout the corridor, raised intersections at Sycamore and Taft, and you'll see that diagram up there in the right hand, raised pedestrian crossings at Tamarack, 39th, as well as Woody, bulb outs, detached sidewalks where feasible, on-street parking, protected bike slip lane at Taft and 36. And this is a unique feature. This isn't necessarily one we have here in our community well, I suppose we have one on 11th Street similar to this, but what this does is it allows those who are traversing down 36th Street and they want to get to Taft, they can take that designated space off the bike lane through that slip lane and then enter onto Taft onto the Sharrows. We also did some alignment shifting through this, almost like a chicane. We did this between Sycamore and Silver. And we also did some alignment shifts southeast of Silver to minimize the impacts to vegetation near the church. This layout really did allow us to ensure that we could preserve as much as the mature tree canopy along the corridor as we possibly could. We also did some alignment shifting where we narrowed the road. Recall when I mentioned closer to 36th Street, it got to 36 feet of wide of a roadway. We narrowed that up. And that's where you're going to see where we're able to include the buffer space and that trees. Something I also want to highlight and why this makes this so unique. The buffer space, the recommendation we're putting forward is to incorporate trees into that buffer space. We brought the City of Boise's Parks and Rec team onto our committee, and we worked with them, and they're with us through the whole design process, agreeing to maintain that space and ensure that we could add some additional vegetation through this corridor. But more importantly, that buffer space with those trees also add an additional vertical element. And the more elements in which we can add, the slower we're going to have, hopefully, vehicles traverse through this area. It's additional friction that we're able to allow for kids who want to use that space, for adults who want to use it to ride down Taft Street. Really, we want to ensure that it is comfortable for everyone. Some additional considerations, pardon me, I'd like to just take one moment. We did take this to the public. They did overwhelmingly support this at 64%. So we knew as a team, we did it right. We did take the time necessary to get this right and worked with all of our stakeholders to ensure we were putting forward a concept that the public could approve. Additional considerations as we move forward, should this be adopted today. These are additional considerations that through the design phase of this project, we would like to take into account. That includes private property irrigation impacts and mitigation if necessary. So should our footprint expand to where we are encroaching upon the existing irrigation, we want to take that into consideration. It's premature to say whether or not we're going to impact the irrigation along this corridor until we get out there and do the necessary survey work. But we wanted to make sure that we highlighted that in our additional considerations. In addition to that, we want to look to the signal design at Taft Street and 36 intersection. Potential, we also want to evaluate the potential to retain existing curb and gutter in some locations along the corridor, more importantly, the north side. With that being said, and significant amount of work through several years and most importantly, a lot of engagement from the public, we are putting forward, as it is written within the packet, the adoption of the Taft Sycamore to 36th Street concept study. This concludes my presentation. I'll certainly stand for any questions.
Thank you, Brooke. Commissioners, questions for staff?
Long time coming. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, Ms. Stacy, do we have? Oh,
Sorry, Madam
Commissioner
President, can I ask a couple of questions? Brooke, how much of the corridor currently has, you mentioned potential to retain some of the curb and gutter. How much of the corridor already has curb and gutter?
I'm trying to think. Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, that's a good question that I don't necessarily know the answer to. I can tell you that the whole northern segment of it, through a good portion where there are sidewalks, does have curb and gutter. In it, segment that it's more rural in nature, that would be closer to Sycamore Street.
Okay.
We see more of kind of that rural, no curb and gutter in some locations. It's just developed and transformed over time. So percentage wise, unfortunately, I can't answer that, but I would certainly be happy to follow up with that following this presentation.
Okay, and then what about how much of it has sidewalk? You mentioned that there's sidewalk is sporadic.
Yes.
Approximately how much has sidewalk?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, again, towards the area, I wonder if I can show it in an image. Let's see if it's in my presentation. I do have one image that, oh, it's hard to showcase it there. So if you look zones 6, 7, and 9, a lot of those are actual, this is parking zones, but just to highlight it, zone 6, 8, and 9, there is sidewalks in some of those locations. And then sporadically, you see it there is zone 3. It's where development occurred over time, and there was an expectation that they just put sidewalk out front and through that development. And so it's mixed throughout the corridor.
Okay, and so then, but it would be safe to say that it's less than half that has sidewalk.
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, absolutely less than half.
Okay.
We would probably say 25%, 20%, if that.
Okay, all right. And so then with the proposals that you're bringing here, let's talk about the existing pavement width. How is that in general? How is the existing pavement width changing from this concept compared to what exists right now?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney. So it starts at 22 feet at the most narrow space. It'll stay at 22 feet. We're hoping to retain the existing footprint there. And then it shifts and gets wider as you get closer to 36th Street, up to 36 feet. And we will be narrowing that space. That happens in when we did our speed analysis through the corridor and we looked through each segment of the corridor. That is the segment where we had the largest number of speeders because it's wider. And so we are narrowing that space up. Through the corridor, ideally, we're going to have 10-foot travel lanes, but there's also parking in some locations through the corridor. And so the width of the pavement without parking certainly will be more expansive to accommodate parking, but the travel lanes are designated to be 10 throughout the whole corridor.
So so essentially, okay, you indicated the narrowest spot right now is 22 feet. And with 2 10-foot lanes and what, 6.5-foot parking, we're typically going to have a minimum of 26 feet, or is it going to be narrower than that in some places?
In some places where the bulb outs, you'll see that we're going to pinch the space to ensure that it add additional traffic calming. So you're going to have the 22 feet or 20 feet at that location in the areas that we have it. And if I can pull up my presentation again. Let's see. Just to give you an idea right there. So in some locations, you're going to have the pinch point with the bulb outs. And in other locations, you're going to have about 26 and a half feet to accommodate parking. And this is going to vary throughout the corridor because where we have the pinch point, there's absolutely no room for parking. And that's why we're actually making a suggestion for attached sidewalks at that location.
Okay.
Because at that location, it's already tight. And we're trying to do the best we can to preserve the mature tree canopy. That's closer to Sycamore, but as we get closer to 36th Street, we have a lot more space to work with. We have a lot more space to ensure there's parking availability. And that's actually the location where we saw the largest number of parking utilization. And hence why we want to ensure that there's parking sporadically throughout that portion. And those were the zones 7, 8, and 9. That's where we saw people who need that parking. And it also happens to be the place where we had the highest amount of dense housing. Whereas on the other side, closer to Sycamore, it's a little bit more rural, lots are a little bit larger, driveways are a little bit bigger.
Okay. And so then, okay, so currently the widest portion is what did you say? Is it 32, 36 feet, something like that?
36 feet.
So
the
on the
largest
new,
portion.
in the new concept, the widest will be 26 and a half.
26 and a half, yes.
Okay. And then sidewalk only on one side.
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, yes.
So does that mean, are there places where we have sidewalk on both sides? So some sidewalk will be removed entirely?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, we're going to examine that through design. There could potentially be options to maybe connect around a curb, but ideally what we want to ensure is that pedestrian access is complete through the whole corridor on the south side. And that was to minimize the tree impacts.
Okay. So then, and this is kind of the final question, do we have kind of a rough estimate of what kind of a cost we're looking at for this project?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, so let me go to that slide. It's in my backup slides. We have to go through all of them. It is, I don't want to misspeak, but it's $4.7 million.
Okay. And as far as the schedule is concerned, assuming it's approved, the presumptive progress of this is on our integrated 5-year work plan. What's the presumptive scheduling for this?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, it's scheduled in the future design. I want to say it's in the next year or two. Should it be adopted this evening?
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brooke. Any other questions? Okay, Ms. Stacy, are there folks that would like to testify?
Yes, we have Mary Beth Netting.
Welcome, Mary Beth. I know you know the drill, but please state your name and address for the record, please.
Mary Beth Nutting, 5390 Northwall Avenue, Boise, 83703. President Pickering, members of the commission. I have notes here so I don't stray because I'm very enthusiastic about this street. I biked on Taft Street to get here, which is just a reminder to me, even after I've biked on it thousands and thousands of times, how much I love that street. And Brooke Green nailed it when she said, this is a very unique street. It's a very unique neighborhood. I absolutely love it. So I've been following it very closely. I have attended 2 of the virtual meetings when it first started up. I have filled out the surveys. I've read all 131 pages of the fabulous staff report, and I appreciated all of the details, even talking about where they're going to put the mailboxes. I mean, that is really quite descriptive and also is a great indication that this team has really engaged with the neighborhood. I have listened to the presentation as a member of the ACHD Bicycle Advisory Committee. However, I am here not as a representative of the committee, but I live in the Collister neighborhood. I have lived here for 29 years. I have biked on Taft Street for 29 years because even when I first moved here, I knew this was a good street to walk on. I started when my children were just little kids in a burly bicycle trailer and felt very safe biking on Taft. They graduated to their own bicycles and trailed behind me biking. And now as a senior, I still bike on Taft. I know this street. I love this concept. I really appreciate the work that Brooke Green and her team has done, looking at those first 3 concepts, taking the feedback from the neighborhood, revising it, going back out again, revising it again, and coming back with this final concept. And I'm going to tell you what I love about it, if that's okay. I'm going to start first with the Sycamore, the raised intersection at Sycamore and Taft. I love that because people do take that intersection quickly. And a couple weeks ago, I found out I have more skin in that game because my daughter, her husband, and my very precious grandson just purchased a lot on Sycamore, and they're going to be building a house there. My daughter, having been raised in this neighborhood, knows that this is a walkable, bikeable community. So super psyched about that. All of the raised crosswalks at all of those very specific streets, so appropriate, love it. The bulb outs, so wonderful. There are so many, the thing that, oh, is my time up? Ugh.
You spent so much time telling us how much you love that you forgot to tell us
Oh.
why. I'm so sorry.
Okay, anyway, I love it. Please adopt this. It's just perfect. And the fact that I'm like one of maybe just a couple people is a big testimony as to how much the neighborhoods approve this. So thank you so much. All right, bye.
Next,
Good job.
next we have Amy Vecchiani with Kieran Miller.
Good evening, Commissioners. So nice to see you. Amy Vecchione is how you pronounce it. It means old man in Italian. I am here from the Collister Neighborhood Association. I have lived in the Collister Neighborhood Association for 20 years, so Mary Beth has me beat. My son and all of his friends commute regularly on Taft Street. We live in the neighborhood, of course, just up the road. I first want to start by saying thank you, Commissioners. Thank you especially to Brooke. Thank you to everybody at ACHD for all of the involvement you've had with the Collister Neighborhood Association, coming back and hearing our feedback and making those changes, especially for the tree canopy. The collaboration you use to improve Taft is really important. There's many children, many parents, many moms who have extreme concerns. There's been obvious increases in traffic in that area. It's a place that we're all very concerned on a regular basis. It's really changed in the time I've been there. We appreciate how much uniqueness is going into each zone, as Brooke pointed out, that you are retaining the nature of the community and you're making those safety improvements is incredibly important to us. The only request we have at this point, since this is far out for the design to be implemented, is temporary improvements, temporary enhancements wherever you can. My son's bus stop is right there at Sycamore and Taft. Mary Beth is right. People do take that curve very quickly. There's a lot of folks who have concerns about that. Anything you can do to improve the safety for the moms, the children, pedestrians like myself, bicyclists like myself, anything that you can do to keep that up to help protect those kids from going to and from school and to and from their bus stops. The bus stops are a big deal. You may not realize how many bus stops there are, not just for the regular school, the public schools, but all of the charter schools pick up in that area. And so there's a lot of kids running to and from. I'm there all the time. I'm there every day. And I just want to repeat that I say thank you so much for your involvement and the changes that you made. And I hope that we can do temporary things to keep it safe as we're going to go ahead and make those changes. I encourage you to adopt the plan. Thank you so much.
Really quick question for you. So are you here on behalf of the association or yourself?
That's a good question. I should have clarified that. I am the chair of the Transportation Committee for Collister, but I'm speaking on myself at this time. I would say that most of the people that I've spoken to that are parents as a part of the Transportation Committee are in favor of this. I haven't heard anybody against it, but I'm going to say most because I got to be careful.
Thank you. Do you mind sharing your address for us?
4479 West Bloom Street, 83703.
Thank you.
And we have somebody on Zoom. I'm gonna butcher your name. You have Jenny?
Hello, my name is Evgeny Kravtsov. I live on 3800 North Jackie Lane, Boise 83704. Whilst I'm on the bench, I do drive on Taft every day. I work off Taft. Our stepson goes to Taft Elementary. His father lives on Arthur right off Taft. So I'm very familiar with the area. In general, I want to voice my support to the current design. I was a little disappointed when the third preferred alternative was kind of overturned, but I do understand the because it had also large support, but I understand the idea behind saving as many mature trees as we can and preserving the kind of that rural feel in places where we can. I just have specific locations that I'm concerned about. I do appreciate the raised intersection when they were introduced and raised crossings, but it would be nice to have maybe the whole Tamarack four-way stop raised instead of just the crossing. And I don't know, like at this point, if it's, changes this big can be made, but it's just something to consider maybe for the future as well, because it's a big, a lot of cars moving around there and there's a school bus stop as well. Another thing that I mentioned in my previous responses to surveys is just like people come, fast through Sycamore intersection as well, they can do the same at Silver Street. And I noticed that they changed the geometry of the approach to the street to make it more of a 90-degree with a slight kind of bend towards the Taft. But I think people would still try to cut that corner. So if it's possible to do the race crossing, maybe on Silver, just to continue sidewalk to prevent people, and it would probably people on Silver will appreciate, less people possibly speeding through there to cut through on Taft like they sometimes do today. Because I use it too sometimes in heavy traffic. Sometimes you turn on Silver instead of Sycamore. So it's another like a fast cut through lane that sometimes people take. And one thing I want to notice is insistence on a lot of parking. And I understand, when when they talked about friction that parking creates, but driving there literally every work day and sometimes multiple times a day, I take a note there is on average, between 8 and 12 cars parked on this street, on the whole segment, the whole length. And certain sections, for instance, the intersection with Woody, where that bend happens, the little, turn, that I also expressed concern before that you kind of see through and people tend to cut corners on those. I feel like inside radii of those turns, like north side where Woody connects towards the west, and between those several driveways on the south side, like they put some parking spots there, but why can't we just do like, narrow it in and bulb out it to make sure that inside corner, because nobody really ever parks there, and it's really kind of, between two driveways that are so close together. But if you narrow the road right there when the inside radii, you will actually kind of force drivers to actually follow the traffic lanes instead of cutting through the parking spots when nobody's parked there. Those are my biggest concerns probably.
Thank you, Evgeny. We've hit time, so thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
Great
All right,
points.
thank you.
That's all we have signed up. If there's
Sure.
anybody else in the audience.
Anyone else that would like to testify on this? I know there's a few other folks online too. All right, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you all for those of you that came and testified. I know how much time it takes to get out of your days, and especially with it being so beautiful. So thank you for doing that for us. Commissioners.
I just
Commissioner
want,
Hanson.
yeah, Madam President, having watched this for many years, I'm really impressed. The number of people who have been involved in this has been a lot. And I was in one of the groups that did a walk down this and have walked and biked on it as well. So understanding what how this road has been around for a long time, and people living on it have been waiting for a long time, even as new infills have come in to change the character. And so they're real eager. They've seen lots of changes all throughout the county, and not much has happened on their street. So, and I also appreciate that, we only have so many resources and we can only deal with some of the critical connecting streets like Taft on a time scale. And so, yeah, it's a few years out. If design is in 26, and I don't know, construction maybe in 27, 28 for design. So we're talking, this isn't probably until 2030. But at least we've got, this concept fully developed and fleshed out. And if resources become available, we're able to accelerate it. We're at least in a position to do that. So unless someone else has something to comment, I appreciate especially that Commissioner Gold was with me when I was walking back and forth on this stretch.
Madam President.
Mr. Gold.
Yeah, I'll just, echo some of those points. I appreciate, Brock, all your work with the neighborhood and, refining all of the feedback and bringing back a plan. I think as design moves forward, continuing to evaluate those intersections and the pinch points that folks are talking about, as well as how parking will interact closer to 36th Street. I think those will be important pieces. And because, this does have a few more years before it would be constructed, I think implementing some temporary improvements in the meantime to accommodate the heavy bike and pedestrian use that's on the road is important as well. I'll make a motion. Okay, so I'll move to approve the Taft Street Sycamore Drive 36th Street concept. That we adopt that and that we implement some temporary traffic calming in the meantime.
I'll second that.
It's a move and seconded. Any other discussion? Commissioner McKinney, do you have anything to share?
No, I think this is a good concept.
I just want to state that I had some really great questions. I thought like at the last work session, and you did a great job, Brooke, answering those. So I don't have any more questions. I think the public comment and just the consensus that you've built about this project is just so essential and provides a lot of confidence from our vantage point in moving forward. And I just want to kind of reiterate the importance around the temporary traffic calming measures, you know, whatever we can do that are quick and fast, but not permanent, not as costly potentially to mitigate what we know is a problem would be really important and impactful. So, all right. Well, with that, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you. All right, moving on to the third one. This is a vacation. It's a public hearing and adoption of resolution number 2420 to vacate a portion of public right-of-way. I believe the property owner is present. Justin or Ryan or someone coming up to explain the preferred action.
Commissioners, Madam President, Commissioners, right before this meeting, we received word from the applicant that they would like to have this item remanded back to staff. There's some things that they would like to reconsider. This is an application they brought to us. It's reasonable that they can change their minds. So at this point, we would request the commission remand this back to staff indefinitely. We'll work with the applicant on the issues that they've raised, and we'll go from that point. I believe the applicant is here to answer any questions you may have, but it's not necessary if the commission is amenable to their request.
I certainly am. If any of the commissioners have any objections, happy to entertain that, but okay, is there a motion?
Madam President,
Commissioner Gold,
I'll make a motion that we remand the vacation public hearing and adoption of resolution number 2420 to vacate a portion of the public right away back to staff indefinitely.
Second that.
so moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, commissioners. All right, moving on to discussion items. Is there any member of the public that would like to address the commission at this time? All right, the meeting is adjourned. We do have a post-commission agenda in one work session. It is the impact fee capital improvement plan update service areas. This is a presentation by staff. Edinson, welcome.
Good afternoon, Commission. Thank you for having us today. For the record, my name is Edison Bautista, ACAC Senior Transportation Planner and co-manager for the Impact Fee and Capital Improvement Plan update. Here with us today, we have Megan Anderson, Impact Fee Administrator and co-manager for this update, as well as our consultant for this project, Kittleson and Associates, with Sonia Delighten in person and Mark Heisinger online. For today's meeting, staff and the consultant wanted to provide an update on the current impact fee and CIP update. This is in response to the commission's feedback and desire to deep dive into the topics reviewed in the preliminary analysis. In this presentation, we'll focus on the topics of service areas, and this will be the first of two separate presentations. The staff and the consultant will present in the month of May and July. In today's discussion, we'll provide information on what a service area is, their requirements, how they're defined, and present different scenarios for future analysis. While staff and the consultant will present proposals on the scenarios, we will be looking for commission confirmation and guidance on the scenarios presented today. With that, I will give the time to Sonia, who will lead us in today's presentation.
Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you, President Pickering, Commissioners. Pleasure to be with you today. As Edinson said, I'm Sonia Delyden with Kittleson and Associates, and we'll be walking through a presentation primarily focused on service area as part of your CIP and traffic impact fee process. Let's make sure. There we go. All right. Just a brief reminder to everyone who's participating in this project and interested of the work that's been done to date. We started this project back in the summer of 2023 last year, where we completed some visioning sessions with both the commission as well as your Capital Investment Citizens Advisory Committee, CICAC, where we talked to both groups about what components of your CIP and traffic impact fee policy are most interested to investigate further. We then conducted a national best practice review on those topics and reported back what we found from national best practices to you in the late fall last year. But as Edinson said, after that meeting, we took your direction and guidance to complete some refined analysis of some of those elements. And so we're here today to report back on that refined analysis. Again, as an overview, what are traffic impact fees and what is your CIP? Traffic impact fees are really a tool that the district has to require developers to pay for their share of countywide system improvements. This is a tool you have to mitigate impacts from development beyond the project-specific mitigations you typically include in their conditions of approval. And they're an important component of ACHD's overall operations. Over the past 5 years, they've made up approximately 18% of your overall budget, approximately $24 million per year. And then in order to be able to have an impact fee program, ACHD does need to have a coordinating capital improvement plan that goes along with that program. So your CIP document is one of the key documents you have as a district, but it is only one. There are several other documents such as your asset management plan, your ADA transition plans, your bike and pedestrian plans, and all of these documents sort of work together in collaboration and help inform decisions that actually feed into your integrated 5-year work plan to what actually gets prioritized and constructed. You'll remember from our best practice review, there were 4 key areas that our visioning sessions resulted in for a more detailed look. Those are here on the screen. But as Edinson said, today we're really going to focus on this concept of service area. As you're well aware, service area is a very complex topic. There's a lot of different elements that go into it. So we're going to be walking through this in actually 2 work sessions. Today, we are going to talk about the context surrounding service area. We're going to present some data that might help inform how we construct service area scenarios. And then based on our data review, we're going to present some draft scenarios that we feel are the most promising to move forward for evaluation to get your input. And then coming back in July, as Edinson said, we'll be taking that input from you, actually evaluating the scenarios that we move forward to report that back for you to get your input on next steps. So let's start with the context that's actually in the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act as it relates to service area. It defines service area as a defined geographic boundary where the public facilities or transportation facilities within that area serve the growth that is within that area. It needs to be established based on sound professional planning or engineering principles. That's also a requirement in the Impact Fee Act. And the Impact Fee Act also restricts that any fees collected within a service area must be spent within that same service area. If you collect fees in a service area, you cannot move those to projects in a different service area. And finally, the Impact Fee Act outlines that if any impact fees are collected and not spent within 8 years, they must be then refunded back to the person who paid those. That's for transportation. It is 20 years for stormwater. Those tend to be larger projects, but those are the requirements within the Impact Fee Act. So all of these things are the legal requirements that must be followed as we look at these scenarios. It's also interesting when we evaluate changes to take a look back at history and remember where we've been with this topic of service area. So since 1992, ACHD's approach to service area has evolved and changed related to the times and the needs that were present at that time. When impact fees were first introduced in 1992, it was done under a single service area, but with multiple benefit zones within that service area. And so the fees were retained within each benefit zone. So it did somewhat operate like multiple service areas, but it was done in a slightly different approach. In 2002, there were legislative changes made to the Impact Fee Act. And so ACHD refined its policies and approach to respond to those changes. And also in 2002, ACHD tested multiple service areas really in a way to balance the cost of projects and fees across different areas within the county. And so that resulted in a scenario with multiple service areas from about 2003 to 2012. In 2012, when updates were being made to the capital improvement plan and your impact fee program, at that point, there were several large projects, quite costly projects under consideration in the CIP. And so the decision was made at that time to go back to a single service area because it was a more effective way to manage those costly projects and projects that really did have countywide benefit. And so that system has been in place today, but as you all know, we are taking a look at if changes should be made.
Sonia, before
Yes.
you move on, do you mind describing, I'm looking at the first from 1992 to 2003.
Yes.
Single service area, but the first bullet said multiple benefit zones and assessment districts. So how is that different from multiple service areas?
That's a great point. So a benefit zone and a service area operate somewhat similarly, but they are slightly different. Benefit zones are specific areas that have targeted projects that need to be accomplished in those benefit zones. And so they are, the growth within that benefit zone typically funnels traffic impact fees towards those specific projects. So it is a somewhat contained subregion within the service area, but having benefit zones as opposed to distinct service areas does still provide some slight flexibility between the two. That was an option that was in place before some of those changes in 2002 were made to the Impact Fee Act. So I'm not sure how applicable it is today to actually have benefit zones, but there is still flexibility within the act to do overlay districts or other things like that, which we'll actually get into later. Does that help?
It does. And I mean, I don't want to assume anything, but could you describe, if you know offhand, what were those like very complicated capital projects, or was it generally like this zone is seeing a lot of development? Like, could you give a little bit more context as to what the benefit zone actually looked like?
Sure. I'm sure there are people in this room that know a lot more than I what was happening in the 1990s. So I can't speak specifically to that, but where I've seen benefit zones applied before are for locations where there may be unique development patterns, such as maybe a university district or a hospital district, things like that. Those tend to be unique areas where benefit zones are typically applied.
Okay, thank you. That's enough.
Yeah, great. I also want to highlight today, and this is a reminder of some information Christy Little presented in a presentation back in April. Regardless of any service area scenario that gets moved forward, your current impact fee program does have latitude and flexibility to address unique land use changes, patterns, travel characteristics. The first component that I want to highlight is the fact that your impact fee program allows for credits for redevelopment. So for example, if there's a developed property, but someone takes that property over and changes it from an old office complex into multifamily housing, the impact fee for that redevelopment is calculated, assuming a reduction, a credit for the land use that was previously there. Your impact fee program does provide flexibility for refinements to traffic impact fees based on land use context. An example I know we at Kittleson have been involved in is looking at some of the recent multifamily housing in downtown, some multifamily housing around the Boise State campus, where we've worked with your staff to modify the impact fees, knowing that those types of land uses may have different travel characteristics than a similar development in a different land use context. And finally, your individual assessment process. That's a process that allows any developer to provide their own data and information to show maybe why their traffic impact fees should be different than what's in your published schedule.
Madam President,
Commissioner
yeah,
Hanson.
I just have a quick question to flesh out the individual assessment process, because that's been raised quite a number of times. And that's actually a reimbursement process. Because a developer, if they have to pencil out, they actually have to front the money. And then if they then spend additional money to prove that maybe they should have a different assessment, so they front the money, they spend money for a different assessment, and then they get reimbursed what it's back. So it's really not a process a lot of people use because of the upfront costs, and which is why we don't find very many individual assessments. That's what I discovered as I was inquiring of staff, why there's so few individual assessments.
Great clarification. Yeah. So with that, with that background as context, let's talk about developing different scenarios for service areas for evaluation and review. Again, these service areas will be provided for comparative evaluation so that you can provide input on how you'd like to move forward as part of this update. I'll remind you again, any scenario we look at does need to meet those requirements in the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act. And really the key elements, I'll reiterate again, in the Impact Fee Act that guide scenario development are the requirements that it needs to be based on sound engineering and planning principles. And also the definition of service area, where essentially it needs to function as a somewhat independent subregion within the county, where the projects and the growth align and are really based on each other, as opposed to the growth in one area driving projects in a different area. So when we,
Sonia, do you
Yes.
mind describing just a little bit for folks that are listening in, like what are, and I don't think you're not using the term best practice, but the language in the act, can you describe and give an example of what those standards are that we have to abide by? Like, can you give us some examples of? What that
Yeah,
looks like?
that's a great question, President Pickering. How I would describe it is that it needs to be defensible and supported by data and information from how travel characteristics function within Ada County. And that's actually what we'll be presenting next.
Thank you.
Yeah. So like I said, I think when we are aligning with these requirements in the Impact Fee Act, we really need to have it be supported by data and information that we can glean from travel characteristics. So that's what we'll be walking through right now. And as we look at those requirements, there's really 3 elements of travel characteristics that we want to focus on, and we feel are best illustrative of how we can abide by those engineering and planning principles. So the first is trip length. So how far do trips go in Ada County? And are there differences in different areas of the county with how far trips travel to their destinations? The next is mode share. So by what modes do trips occur within Ada County? And are there differences in different locations within the county in terms of mode share? Do some locations have higher vehicle mode share and others have lower? Or is it relatively consistent across the county? And then finally, trip capture. So trip capture gets at the question of, do trips originating in certain portions of the county tend to stay within that area for the most part? Or do trips within certain portions of the county travel commonly to other portions of the county? And again, the data in trip capture really addresses the impact fee requirements that a service area needs to be a defined boundary that functions as a somewhat independent system. So the data source that we used to evaluate these three components of trip characteristics is called Replica. It's a common big data source that transportation practitioners have been using recently. Replica collects detailed travel data from anyone traveling with a cell phone, a GPS component in their vehicle, or other types of connected technology. The data you will see is from Replica's most recent data source, which is from the spring of 2023. We also cross-check the data we were obtaining out of Replica with some of the more common data sources that ACHD has used recently, such as the Compass Travel Demand Model, the Compass Household Survey travel characteristics that we see. And we found that the information aligned quite well with those. So we felt very comfortable that it was accurately representing the most recent types of travel characteristics within the county. So let's get to the data. So the first is trip length. So this map shows by census tract, we were able to get down to the level of census tract. Within Ada County, what is the average length of trips? The lighter colors on this graphic show the shortest trips, with the shortest average trips we found being about 4 miles. And then the darker colors represent longer trips. So the darker you get, the longer the trip. And the darkest colors, you'll see those on the outskirts of the county. Those represent the longest trips. So that would be about 11 miles on average. So if you look at this and look at patterns in the data, you can see that the lightest areas on the map are those areas actually surrounding downtown Boise. So like the north end, the west end, the east end, and then south of downtown, including the Boise State campus area. Those were the areas with the shortest trip lengths. And then you could also see though that downtown itself actually has slightly longer trip lengths than those surrounding areas, likely because of the more regional land use draws that are in downtown, larger employers, state office buildings, so a regional medical campus, that sort of thing. You can also see that pattern if you look around St. Al's, just off I-84 there, that also has slightly longer trips, likely due to the regional nature of travel that it attracts. And then not surprising, as I said, those areas on the outskirts of the county to the north and the south have the longest trip lengths and need to travel further to go to employment, shopping, education, and other needs. Okay, I'll move on. So the next graphic is mode share. So this graphic shows by census tract again, what % of trips are being made by personal vehicle versus some other mode, whether it's walking, biking, transit. So the areas with the lightest colors here have the lowest portion of trips that happen by personal vehicle, which the lightest on here is about 78% of trips happening by personal vehicle. And then the darkest areas have the highest proportion of trips that happen by personal vehicle, up to about 90% in the darkest census tracts here. So overall, the data shows that anywhere in Ada County, you have at least 3/4 of the trips happening by vehicles, but some areas definitely are on the lowest end in terms of vehicle mode share and some are higher. Similar to trip length, you can see the areas surrounding downtown tend to be the lightest areas, the north end and then south of downtown, particularly around the Boise State campus. Those tend to have the highest portion of non-auto trips, walking, biking, transit. You can also see that there is a pattern change from the east portion of the county compared to the west portion of the county. And what we found, and I just want to make sure I have the right numbers here. So in the eastern portion of the county, we found on average, the mode share is about in the low 80% vehicle trips. So about 80 to 82% vehicle trips, where on the western portion of the county, the average overall was in the high 80s, more about 88% vehicle percent. Okay. And then finally, internal capture. So as a reminder, the data we're trying to evaluate here with internal capture informs us if there's ways to portion out subregions within the county that can function more independently as it relates to transportation system improvements and growth. Note, these are not recommended service areas at this point. This is just how we broke the county out to look at the data. Again, to meet the requirements in the Impact Fee Act, what we're looking for in this data is balance across the different subregions. So we're looking for a scenario that has all regions with the highest percent possible. We're looking for that balance so that we can say each of the regions in the scenario functions somewhat independently. So if we start at the high level at the top left here, if we look at the county as a whole, we can see that the county as a whole does function somewhat independently. 91% of the trips originating in Ada County stay within Ada County. If we try to refine it further, we first looked at what if you break the county out into two regions, east and west. The dividing line is approximately Cole Road. What we found here is, again, you still obtain a relatively high rate of internalization for both those areas. So east of Cole Road in the county, approximately 65% of the trips in that area stay within that area. And then west of Cole Road, it's actually 74% of the trips that originate in that area stay within that area. We looked at it north-south as well. The dividing line in the north-south here is the interstate, I-84. North of the area had a high internal rate with 80%, but then south of the interstate, we found a much lower internal rate with only 52% of the trips staying internal to that area. And then we took it a step further and looked at 4 different regions. So kind of northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. The highest region we found in this scenario was the northwest region with about 64% internal, but then we found all of the other regions sort of decreased from there in terms of their rate of containing their own trips. So I'll keep going unless there's any other questions at this point. Yes.
This is really fascinating. Just as a side note, I feel like you should probably say, let's say it again, that the 91% of our trips stay within the county that originate in the county. Is that correct? Like, I feel like that should be lower. It's just wild that it's 91%. Not that I'm asking for like, it is, but I mean, I'm just kind of processing that, because that's.
But the Canyon County's a lot lower.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
President Pickering, actually, you've got your names mixed up today, so you're throwing me off here, Commissioner Goldthorpe. We actually looked at that because we had that very same question, but we were surprised because we also thought it would be much lower, but we looked at Canyon County and it's actually in the low 80s of the amount of Canyon County trips that stay in Canyon County. We thought it was going to be much lower as well. They are lower than Ada County, of course, but yeah.
It just like an observation too. And again, we're not here to hypothesize or propose any other cuts of, the regions here. But I mean, I feel like the 4 options here are really helpful to understand the breakdown of just movement as a region or as a county. But also just the fact that combining 2 versus 4 and having the southern part, that would bump the percentage from 48 and 41% to 52%, but that's still quite a bit lower, right, than the second map or countywide as a whole. So I'm just processing out loud the various configurations, even within the 4 maps that you've given us, gives us some good sense around how folks are traveling throughout the county.
President Pickering, that's correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So now we move on to actually developing scenarios out of all this data. And to develop the scenarios, we can't just look at one of the pieces of data, internal capture or trip length. We really need to combine and overlay all of those, each of those data pieces to look at what story it tells us and how can that data be used to support a service area, either concept or scenario for evaluation. So we as a project team looked at this, Kittleson evaluated this, and we developed 3 potential scenarios that we feel are strongly supported by the data or supported by the data enough to carry further for further evaluation. And so I want to present that to you right now, what those scenarios are. And of course, pending your input, these are the scenarios which we would evaluate further and then bring back to you later in July. So I'll discuss each in more detail, but at a high level, the 3 scenarios are scenario 1, which would be a single service area, but with an overlay zone. So this kind of gets back to that benefit area. It's a little bit different than a benefit area and overlay zone, but I'll talk about that in more detail. The second scenario would be a 2 service area model where you have 2 separate service areas within the county. And then scenario 3, which would be a single service area, what is similar to current conditions. So let's talk about each of these in a little more detail. So scenario 1, a single service area with an overlay zone. So in this scenario, there'd be 1 single service area with 1 set of projects for the whole county. The whole county would pay into all those projects, or all the development in that county would pay into those projects. However, in this overlay zone, which you can see defined here in orange, the traffic impact fees would be reduced in that overlay area because we saw from the data that it had different travel characteristics, particularly in terms of trip length and mode share. It had shorter trips and it had a higher proportion of non-auto trips. We drew the boundary from approximately Hill Road down to approximately south, capturing south of the Boise State campus, the southeast neighborhood. There could be refinements to this boundary if there's the desire, but this is the boundary we felt was best supported by the data. So that would be this scenario.
I hate to interrupt you, but so the boundary follows the census tract lines?
Right now, we're following the census tract lines because that's how we parceled out the data. It doesn't exactly follow the census tract lines because we also base the boundary on transportation facilities as well, but it in general follows that census tract information that we presented earlier. Okay, scenario 2 would be 2 service areas within the county. So there would be in each service area here, you would have, it's a distinct set of projects, its distinct cost, and its distinct growth, therefore resulting in distinct different impact fees in each of the 2 service areas. And we feel that this scenario is supported quite well by the internal trip capture data, where we saw dividing the county into 2 areas, east and west, produced 2 regions that both had a relatively high internal trip capture. It was the scenario that best balanced the breakdown between internal trip capture. And then also the mode share data does support this scenario as well, where we found in the eastern portion of the county, the vehicle mode share was in the low 80% compared to the western portion of the county where the vehicle mode share was in the high 80%. So that would be this scenario. And finally, the third scenario that we recommend moving forward to evaluation is the single service area scenario. Not only is it nice to have this for comparative evaluation when we're looking at the other two scenarios, but it is also supported by the data when you look at a high level countywide, where we've got 91% of the trips staying within the county. It is functioning as an independent service area. The average trip lengths and the average mode shares, while there is variation, the variation is within certain boundaries. So we feel that could still be supported and at least carried forward for comparative evaluation.
Sonia,
President,
Commissioner Goldthorpe?
could you go back to scenario one?
Absolutely.
And just explain again what the impact of having an overlay zone like that would be to impact fees?
It would likely not change the impact fees. So maybe I'll say it this way. So impact fees inside of the overlay zone would be less than outside of the overlay zone, but the cost of your projects would be the same. So to offset people inside that zone paying less, people outside the zone would likely pay a little more. So your overall revenue from impact fees would not change with this scenario. It would just be slightly shifting the proportion of where they're coming from. Not everybody pays the same.
Thanks.
Sonia, could you go back to the census tracts? Because I'm trying to understand, it was hard in the bigger, in the graphic. Like, because I represent the largest part of Garden City. And obviously we're in Garden City. There's a lack of facilities. It doesn't really support lots of car travel. So I'm looking at it here. So it's in that purple-ish area. Do you have any idea what, like, in terms of the key for the purple on that census tract there for Garden City on this side of town? What percentage that correlates to?
I don't have that number specifically, but if I'm looking at the gradation in the colors, I would say it would likely be somewhere in the mid-80s% in terms of mode share. It wouldn't be at the lowest end of 78, but it would likely be in the mid-80s.
Okay.
Madam President?
And yeah, Commissioner McKinney.
Yeah, Sonia, two quick questions on that. The one question about relating to the census, using census tracts is sort of preliminarily when we start with that as our fundamental geographic unit for analysis, we're kind of assuming then that all of these transportation characteristics that we're discussing are more or less uniform across one census tract. And yet I don't know that we have information that really tells us whether that's true or not. That's kind of the first question in my mind. So maybe, I don't know if you can address that, and then I have another question that's different.
Yeah, President Pickering, Commissioner McKinney. So that is correct. What we have done is take for any of these data points, we've taken the average for that census tract. So we're averaging the total of all the trips from that census tract. So they're not all uniform. Some may be higher, some may be lower, but we are averaging them by census tract. That was what we felt was the most refined sub area to base this on. We felt it gave us the most clear picture of how things might change throughout the county, which areas of the county may be operating different, but your point is right. Every trip within a census tract isn't uniform. What these maps present is the average of each census tract.
Okay. Well, and see, part of the reason I ask that is because, of course, on the one hand, you could have some fairly significant variation within one census tract that then this method isn't going to capture. And here's, if we look at this image just as an example, you have some fairly light areas that are way out in fairly rural areas of the county. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around that because on the one hand, I say to myself, we're in a highly rural area of the county. The mode share concept doesn't seem that likely. urban, closer to downtown Boise, that makes a lot more sense. And so when I look at this, I kind of get a picture that I have a hard time seeing relative to just the reality that I know about. And that's why that issue makes me stop and pause. Anyway, it's an issue that gives me pause. And I don't know that I have the answer to it, but that's one concern. Let me ask my other question. And that is, we go back to the slide with the overlay area, the option 1, I guess. One of the requirements for impact fees was that they had to be used within 8 years or refunded. Would that rule apply here to this overlay area compared to the rest of the county, or would it not apply?
President Pickering, Commissioner McKinney, great questions. I'll just touch briefly on your question about this because we saw the exact same thing that you did. What we are presenting here is % of trips. So probably a more accurate way that this map should have been created was % of trips per capita or something like that. Because what you're seeing in here is we have this huge rural area at the bottom there. What's happening is that there's not many trips coming from that area overall. And so even a small number of non-auto trips skew that percentage overall. So that's what's happening in this graphic. So we need to look at it, but really look for the trends overall is what we're finding. Your second question about service area, about this scenario, excuse me. An overlay zone is considered different under the Impact Fee Act as compared to a service area. So because this scenario, there would be one single service area with only an overlay zone within it. Fees collected in that overlay zone still contribute to the service area overall, the entire countywide service area. Any fees collected anywhere else in the county could still be attributed within that overlay zone. The overlay zone really only functions to modify the fees paid for that area. It doesn't restrict you from either spending or moving funds in and out of that area.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, so we were here. So our plan, pending your feedback, is to take these scenarios and evaluate them and compare them. So we will be evaluating them based on the sound engineering and planning principles that support the scenario, the resultant projects and fees that play out under each of these scenarios, how each of these scenarios impact project flexibility, timing, and implementation, and then how each scenario compares related to the administration costs and complexities that would result under that scenario. And so our plan is to compile all this information, evaluate this information for each of the scenarios, and then what we would do is bring you back that evaluation at the July 17th work session for your further consideration. And so with that, we absolutely welcome your additional questions or input so that we can best move forward.
I just want to say thank you and to the team. This was a really, I think this topic in general, there's so many pieces and parts that we've talked about how they connect with one another, but the way that you've walked us through this, it really is comprehensive and exciting and digestible. So yeah, commissioners, any thoughts on how to move forward? Commissioner Goldthorpe?
Yeah, question. When you showed the segment with 4 different zones and some of them were quite a bit lower than others, those lower zones would be probably have their impact fees raised the most. Is that correct?
I don't know if I can answer, President Pickering, Commissioner Goldthorpe, I don't know if I could answer that question for you right now.
So I
What
did
that
I did
information,
Sonia here.
sorry, yeah. What that information tells me is that the trips in those areas, the majority of trips in those areas actually are traveling to other portions of the county. So any development in those areas should be not only paying for projects in those areas, but probably projects elsewhere.
That's what I understood.
Yes.
And for years now, I've listened to especially the city of Meridian bemoan the fact that twice a day CUNA shows up. And that's one of the reasons we've been so interested in the economic development that CUNA should and hopefully will continue to experience, so that that won't continue. But that answers my question pretty good.
Great.
Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, thanks. This is definitely better and more comprehensive, gives us a little bit of a deeper dive into the notion of a development impact fee system for an agency that doesn't decide where development happens, which is the artificial nature of this. Canyon County can't go out and say, we're going to have a development impact fee countywide and make Caldwell and Nampa and all the cities and that their development decisions and the developers investing in those paying for that and the city not having a role. So I appreciate that this was done. I think a key point at this point, and I think the point that is illustrated by that two regions one, it escapes nobody's notice that the two regions are region to the west, to the east is entirely within Boise plus Garden City. And the region to the east has West Boise and the other cities. So that is kind of obvious. The other notion that is fairly obvious in the overlay zone, which makes a huge amount of sense, is that the CIP basically has no investments near there, or to the extent that there's some activity on State Street, that's about as close as you can get. Most of the CIP investments are quite a distance, which is why not only are they traveling within their own zone, they're likely not traveling to those areas where the expansion is. And so those are the two observations. I think that the thing that struck me this year in going through the process of evaluating ACHD's value to our partner land use agencies, our cities, was when the legislature put us in the crosshairs and says, you need to just change and we're going to go after you. We're going to completely change your governance. And all of the cities to the west of that line were neutral on that. Through Compass, we attempted to try and provide a united front, and they were neutral. So there's this sort of like this notion that maybe we need to be much more reflective of the development decisions within those cities and let them decide whether they want to share a service area with each other. Because this is somewhat arbitrary. I know the data that was presented back in December showed cities had single service areas, but not multiple cities within one service area, because that's kind of artificial, because that doesn't exist. We're a unique creature with respect to the fact that we're a single purpose and we're countywide, and we have general purpose governments, 7 of them located within us, who make the development decisions. So I think that information, before I can feel comfortable with this, really needs to go deeper into what does it look like with the cities participating in this. They really need to decide. They're the ones that get to decide where development is. Boise City, the other thing that we are now seeing the impact of Boise City's change in its zoning ordinances. And they're getting lots of requests for a lot of small infill development, and every one of them's paying development impact fees. And they're the kind of places where you tell them, explain, oh, there's an alternative you can do, but you have to pay us up front. They're like, oh, whatever, we'll try and pencil this out. Because by the time we do all of that, it's probably not worth it. So they end up just paying the regular fees. So the overlay zone, although I would suggest probably multiple overlay zones that really tie into where those investments are happening for infill development. Actually makes the most sense of these and the two regions because of the development patterns also and the nature, largely because of the city boundaries. And I'd really like to see that. I'm just not comfortable moving forward with any system that it seems so arbitrary to have a countywide single purpose impact fee district when it's the general purpose governments that are making the development decisions and they're the ones should be driving this. And whether they believe the development that they're trying to encourage within their city pays for development, pays for infrastructure, for, things outside of their cities. So that's my concern.
Commissioner Hanson, I think, but the question is like, how do we want to move forward with these three scenarios and further exploring them? And I understand your point about the city's role in that. So, but do you support further evaluating these scenarios or just abandoning it because the
No,
city need to be involved? I'm just trying to get some.
Further evaluating and how we do it with the cities, because to me, I think that's where the rubber hits the road. We have to do that. The general purpose governments decide development. I don't know what the comparison is, that, we're trying to get a 4-year degree. I think we've gotten a couple of the first semesters down. And so let's build on that. I think we're a long way from really grappling with this in a way that is sound for the future, especially as we're seeing different development decisions happening amongst our general purpose partners. And that we are not going to be, we are the aggravation point between them, and it shouldn't play out here. It needs to be played out between them directly. And we saw that this year. This should not be the place it gets played out with, whether it's through impact fees or through their decisions about governance or other things. But let's not lock into something that just simply aggravates that.
Mr. Goldthorpe?
I don't mind this as an ongoing exercise, but I think that if we drag in a whole bunch of other people to help us make a decision that we're going to be blamed for or very seldom given credit for, but blamed for when it costs other people more money and they see these trips and everything. It's an exercise, that's fine, but I think we ought to concentrate on an overlay zone and leaving us the way we are.
Mr. Gold?
Thanks, Madam President. Maybe just what could be helpful and what Commissioner Hanson's talking about is more detail around, the fees that the land use agencies collect versus the fees that we collect versus how impact fees are allocated versus how, the general dollars that we have are allocated. Just maybe more detail around that, because I don't think, obviously this discussion pertains to impact fees, but I don't think the whole issue hinges on impact fees.
And Sonia, I really am supportive of moving forward with the three options because I think they really provide a good comparative analysis. Not that any one is better than the other. It's just we need to have the control versus the overlay versus this other model, right? But I think, in the census tracts, you mentioned Boise State, right? And just the growth and the types of trips, the lower vehicle dependency that's there, the mode share. I just wonder too, if there could be, and not to put you on the spot, but some further details around, and I think it makes sense for the downtown Boise overlay, absolutely. But why not consider multiple overlays, kind of coming back to Commissioner Hanson's point and potentially even maybe what, I don't think you said this explicitly, Commissioner Goldthorpe, but I think just kind of getting a sense of what would be the threshold besides just what you clearly demonstrated with the city of Boise. There are some growth patterns happening within some of our cities that could benefit the conversation around development patterns.
Yep, President Pickering, Commissioners, these are all great points. One thing I'll just add, just to follow up on that is, we're a long way from making this decision
Oh,
yet,
yeah.
but if we do proceed with a single service area with an overlay zone, and we do the overlay zone in this location for this update, we know in 4 years, there will be another update, new development will have occurred, new patterns will have occurred, and all of this information could be reevaluated again at that time, and new overlay zones could create themselves in the future too. Yeah, so that's definitely a consideration. But we will come back. I think there is more detailed, we could look at that data in more detail when we come back for evaluation to document or present to you if there are any other areas where we see that being a potential at this time too.
And even if it's not a potential, it's more of like, hey, these are the elements that are compelling, but it's not to the degree,
Sure.
right? Like, I think those nuances are really important, especially for us, because we hear, I mean, all of us have very unique districts, right? But I noticed that there were several census tracts on the bench that are really close to some of those patterns in downtown Boise. And so I'm just, and I have to go back to my constituents, and they've been asking for a service area, that's smaller, even up there, for quite some time. So it helps me be one more informed about the patterns that are existing within my district and how that relates to other parts of the county. But then also is more defensible with whichever path we go if we do change course. More
Great.
information is better.
Absolutely.
President?
Commissioner McKinney?
Yeah, let me just put in my 2 cents if I may. I think in all of this discussion, I have to admit that I'm a little bit skeptical, given that we've tried it before and it didn't work well. The district went with service areas and we have experience that didn't prove that it was a benefit. Instead, it tended to be a hindrance, primarily because it limited the flexibility of the district to use impact fees where they were needed most, as far as the traffic needs demanded. Second of all, in most things that we do, adding complexity rarely ends up being a benefit. And dividing the county into service areas adds a lot of complexity. And I think in the end, we wouldn't find much benefit, but we would find greater cost and challenges in administering the program. And so because of those factors, I'm a little bit hesitant. I'm not sure that it's really wise to keep going down this road, because in the end, I don't see that there's likely to be a lot of benefit, but there could be a lot of downside. That is again, the flexibility in our ability to use impact fees where they're needed most. And those are my concerns. And I kind of stop and wondered, are we really using our resources wisely in doing all this analysis, as opposed to saying, we've tried this before and it didn't work well. Let's let's keep going with what's working right now. The concerns about the way it works now, I think, are perhaps a little bit overstated. So that's my opinion.
You want to?
Just one last thing. I know that for many years, one of the things that I've been harping on is that the way to solve the congestion problem is for people to live, shop, and recreate closer to where they live. And it would seem to me, without going into a huge long spiel, that by changing the districts, we would be forcing development to occur closer to downtown, because developers might feel that, hey, impact fees are only half as much if we do it here. And that upsets people, because then you got worse traffic problems than ever where the impact fees are less. When in fact, we still have to improve the entire system. And especially in the areas right now that, because of the enormous growth in this area, all of a sudden, it seems to me like we might be sending the wrong message. That's all.
Well, Commissioner Goldthorpe, I think you bring up a great point as to why we need to further evaluate, like, because we don't know exactly what the cost difference would be in that overlay. I think, again, so I think there's a lot more that we need to discover, and just because we've been and we've tried different models in the past doesn't mean that we should stick with what we've had for quite some time, because we're one of the fastest growing counties in the country. And I think, again, going through this process confirms if we are doing the right model or if we're not. So, and for those of us that have more dense areas, we've been hearing for quite some time that the model currently doesn't work for them. And some of the data is proving that the mode share is shifting. So anyway, but Sonia, thank you. Thanks, team.
President Pickering, Commissioners, I had one last slide just to remind you what's happening next. We'll be back here in July with this evaluation. Appreciate the feedback from tonight. We will incorporate that in our next work session with you. And then after that, of course, pending a direction from you all, we will be moving forward with updating your 2025 CIP.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. And we do not have a meeting next week, so we'll be back on June 5th. Thank you.
He crushed it. Nailed it.
There's nothing to sign.
Oh, okay.